I got a couple of questions about this, and so I figure we'll cover this at the top. James from Long Island says, WWE put out a video ranking the top 25 debuts in WWE history. What do you think of their list? And what would you say is the greatest debut ever in WWE? So I watched this video that they put up on their YouTube channel, and it's a WWE list. So of course it's going to have some questionable choices. Any list that's 25 deep is going to have some questionable placements. When they talk about greatest debuts, we don't know if they're talking about the moment itself. Are they including the overall influence on this person in the company? You know, like if they went on to become something really big. So, you know, they're ranking their debut high because of that. I don't know what their criteria is. But let's go through this. We'll start from number 25. We'll work backwards to number 1, and I'll chime in along the way with my thoughts. Number 25 on the list is Solo Sikoa, who debuted in the main event of Clash at the Castle in front of 62,000 people in Cardiff last year. Interfered in the main event between Roman Reigns and Drew McIntyre. And that is a hell of a spot to make your debut. You spend over a year in NXT, and all of a sudden your first appearance on the main roster, and you are costing Drew McIntyre the championship against Roman Reigns. You are saving the reign of Roman Reigns. So that's a pretty big way to make a debut. Number 24, Santino Marella, who won the Intercontinental Championship in his debut. I think, if anything, this is too low. I would have this a little higher up, probably somewhere at least between 10 and 20. Number 23, Shinsuke Nakamura. Now, they are talking about, I believe they're talking about the main roster debuts. His main roster debut, I remember it because Miz and Maurice were in the ring. And this would have been, I guess, after WrestleMania 33, I guess, when Miz had that mixed tag match with Cena and with Nikki Bella. But we had, and I forgot his name, this great violinist who came out. Lee, was it Lee? I forgot his name, but he came out, he started playing the violin, and it was a great entrance. It was a great entrance, but it doesn't hold a candle to his NXT debut in Dallas, and I was in the building for that. For his match with Sami Zayn, his very first appearance in WWE, and it was incredible. So, I mean, if you wanted to include his NXT debut, we would have to bump that up a whole bunch of spots. As far as his main roster debut, I guess you could say top 25. It might be on there somewhere. Number 22 is the Usos and Tamina. I have no memory of this whatsoever. Number 21, Baron Corbin, who won the Andre Battle Royal at WrestleMania 32. He dumped out Kane to win the Andre Battle Royal trophy. Right? They claimed 101,000 people in the building at WrestleMania. That was Baron Corbin's main roster debut. Number 20 was Umaga. That was the night after WrestleMania 22. Came to the ring. He got introduced by Armando Alejandro Estrada. He came to the ring. He had the wild hair. This is before he was, braiding it back. And he beat up Ric Flair in his very first appearance. He laid out Ric Flair. Number 19, Rey Mysterio, who debuted on SmackDown back in 2002. I believe he wrestled Chavo in his debut match, and I think he came back out that night at the end of the show and did a big dive off the top of the steel cage, I want to say, onto the Un-Americans, if I'm remembering correct. Number 18, I got a beef with this one. Number 18 is the Nexus. I don't know how they came to slot this in at number 18, but this absolutely should be a top 10 debut. I think it is ridiculous that is not much lower on this list. That is one of the greatest angles they've ever shot in the history of Monday Night Raw. And the fact that they got buried 2 months later should have no impact on the fact that the Nexus debut itself and what happened that night and just the chaos that ensued and how real it felt. They did a very good job of making that feel genuine and getting a lot of people talking and getting people concerned who bought into it as a shoot. There were people who did. They beat up the announcers. They pulled up the mats. They showed us the fucking plywood boards under the mat, which we had never seen before, right? All this mass carnage. We had never seen anything like this before. They beat up John Cena. They beat up CM Punk. The fans had voted CM Punk in the main event that night to wrestle John Cena. They had fan voting. Punk, this was during the phase where he was wearing a lucha mask, and Punk was a heel, and he got in on it too. That's one of those little things that made it feel more genuine, is the fact that, well, John Cena is the babyface, so, he's getting beaten up and they're leaving CM Punk. No, Punk came in, he tried to go after these guys, they beat him up too. They did an incredible job with that angle. And it was honestly the closest thing to an NWO-esque angle that we had since the original NWO. The fact that they put this in the number 18 spot is ridiculous. Number 17, Asuka. And again, I could tell you I have no memory of how she debuted on the main roster. Number 16 was Carlito. I believe Carlito won the U.S. title on his first night. Right? It was the first night, not the following week. So that was a pretty memorable debut. Number 15 was too, like whether you like the guy or not, the Great Khali. And I will give them that. It deserves a place here on this list, probably top 20. It was on SmackDown. It was a match between Undertaker and Mark Henry. Undertaker was beating him up outside the ring, and all of a sudden, no music or anything, here comes Daivari with the Great Khali, leading this giant man down the aisle. Undertaker looks up, and he sees this. And Khali is in the ring. Undertaker gets in the ring and goes, face to chest with Khali. And Khali beats him down, hits him with a brain chop, and he boots him down. And if you had never seen this guy before, he looks like this giant monster, who's I would imagine it was the way a lot of kids felt when they were watching Giant Gonzalez. When he debuted at the Rumble in 93 and he eliminated The Undertaker, and it was almost the same thing. It was almost a carbon copy. It wasn't the Royal Rumble, but it was almost a carbon copy of the exact same thing. But it's a memorable moment. So I'm willing to accept that. The Khali debut would be that high on the list. Number 14 was Braun Strowman. That would have been when he debuted as part of the Wyatt family. Number 13 was Sting, who debuted at Survivor Series back in 2014 and helped beat the Authority when he dragged Dolph Ziggler on top of, I guess it was Seth Rollins, right, for the winning pinfall in that match, and he gave Triple H a Scorpion Death Drop, and then he walked out. Better we don't talk about what happened at WrestleMania with Sting, but that was a memorable debut. He was the one that we never thought, and I never thought, Vince would get his hands on. Not at that point. At that point, I thought too much time has gone by, he's too old. If it hasn't happened by now, it's never going to happen. Whatever his reservations were about not coming to WWE, why would he change now? But, money talks, and people change their minds, and so there was Sting for the first time on WWE television in 2014 after this long career and all the years he spent in TNA. He kept re-signing with Dixie. It was a big deal to see Sting for the first time on WWE television. Or shall I say, the Vigilante. Number 12 is The Undertaker, who debuted at the Survivor Series in 1990. He was the $1 Million Man's mystery partner in his Survivor Series match. That's a memorable one. Number 11 was Booker T, who debuted as part of the Invasion angle. He gave an axe kick, I believe, right, to Steve Austin during the main event of the King of the Ring pay-per-view in 2001. Then he put Austin through a table. I think that's where Austin broke his hand. Then we get into the top 10. And if I had an issue with the placement of the Nexus, I have an issue with the placement of this. Number 10, the very bottom of the top 10, is Chris Jericho. Ranking Chris Jericho's debut at number 10 on a list of greatest WWE debuts is a travesty. And I saw Jericho, he quote tweeted the list on Twitter. I think he said, "Hold my beer." Yeah, that's I don't even know what to say to that. To put it at number 10. Got to be people who are newer fans or younger fans who just don't have a concept of how big of a deal that was when he debuted. And it wasn't even just the night he debuted, it was the build up to it and all the fans who knew of Chris Jericho from WCW. And they heard the rumors, and people had signs in the crowd for weeks on television even leading up to this. And they had the Millennium Countdown. The way they did this was just fucking brilliant. And then the actual debut itself. He had that badass music. As soon as they threw the name Jericho up on that screen, you had The Rock standing in the middle of the ring. He interrupted The Rock. And they threw the name Jericho up on the screen, and the place exploded. I think they were in Chicago, and the building exploded. They knew exactly who this man was. And yes, The Rock, he insulted him. He tried to make him feel less than, and you could certainly nitpick what they did as far as having Rock berate him and belittle him. But it doesn't take away from the fact that Jericho got to go toe-to-toe on the microphone in his debut on Raw when it was at its absolute peak of popularity with one of the biggest stars in the entire business. Arguably the number 2. Or if you want to say Austin Rock 1A, 1B, he was right there. One of the biggest stars in the entire business. How the fuck do you put Chris Jericho's debut at number 10? I don't understand. Number 9 was John Cena when he came out on SmackDown in 2002, Ruthless Aggression, and he wrestled Kurt Angle. That's a very memorable one. That belongs in the top 10. Number 8, Kevin Owens. Now, Kevin Owens had a very memorable main roster debut. He answered the U.S. title open challenge of John Cena, if I remember correctly, or this was around the time that Cena was doing the U.S. Open Challenge stuff. He didn't wrestle him on his first night, but he was the NXT champion at the time. It was a big shock to see him walk out there on Raw. And he left John Cena laying. And then 2 weeks later, at the pay-per-view that they had, he went in there and he beat John Cena. He pinned John Cena, and that just wasn't something that happened very often back then. But I would even lump in the NXT debut. Not only did Kevin Owens have a memorable main roster debut, he had a memorable NXT debut because his very first NXT show was Our Evolution. And he was in the opening match against CJ Parker, right, the current Juice Robinson. He got his nose busted open. It was a quick match, a quick win for Owens. But then, of course, he came back out at the end of the night when his good friend Sami Zayn became the NXT champion, and he hugged him and he embraced him. And then he betrayed him. And he powerbombed him on the apron of the ring. I'd say that was a pretty memorable debut for Kevin Owens. So he's one of the few to have not just one, but 2 memorable debuts. Where he slots in the top 10, is he number 8? Is it number 6? I don't know. I mean, we could quibble over that, but he absolutely deserved a spot in the top 10. Number 7 is The Rock. This one was weird to me. I know why they put him there, because of what he would go on to become. And in his debut, he debuted in Madison Square Garden. He debuted at the Survivor Series, and he won. They put him in an elimination match. Big pineapple head, Rocky Maivia comes out, big cheesy smile on his face, and he won. He won his debut at Madison Square Garden. So I get it. I get why they would want him on this list. It doesn't crack my top 10, I don't think. I'm looking at this list at some of the other ones they have on here, and I would put them ahead of The Rock. Number 6, AJ Styles. Definitely worthy, despite them almost ruining it with their camera work. Roman Reigns, with that confused look on his face, they lingered on him for far too long. But AJ's debut at the Royal Rumble in 2016 is definitely top 10 worthy. Brock Lesnar is another one. Brock Lesnar is on their list at number 5. Great. A great debut. I remember watching that live. I'd never seen Brock Lesnar before, didn't know who he was. Just by looking at him, he looked like fucking Frankenstein. He looked like a very scary individual. And then you saw Paul Heyman with him. We had not seen Paul Heyman in many months, since he got fired from the announce booth, and they brought back Jerry Lawler and they carried Heyman out, kicking and screaming. So seeing Heyman with him was exciting because we had not seen Paul Heyman in a managerial role in WWE. He hadn't been a manager since the Paul Lee Dangerously days. But this fucking guy, I mean, Lesnar comes out there looking like just made out of granite, and he is just laying waste to everybody. And then poor Spike Dudley. I mean, it's tough to go back and watch what he did to Spike, and Spike took a lot of abuse during his career, right? Going back to the ECW days. But man, I mean, Brock, he powerbombed the shit out of this guy, and you could see his head smacking over and over against the mat. This was about as impactful a debut, physically, as I've ever seen. And then, of course, we all know what he would go on to accomplish. So, Brock being in the top 5, you know what? That sounds about right to me. What I disagree with is number 4. Number 4 is Ronda Rousey. And what they're talking about is Ronda's debut at the Royal Rumble. Not even her first match or anything, but her appearance at the Royal Rumble back in 2018, where she came out, and that would have been, I guess, the very first women's Rumble. Asuka won that Rumble. Asuka was in the ring. She had Charlotte Flair on one side holding up her SmackDown Women's Championship, Alexa Bliss on the other side of her holding up the Raw Women's Championship, and then we hear bad reputation. And here comes Ronda Rousey in her leather jacket. She gets in the ring and she very awkwardly stands there and points at the WrestleMania sign. And then they all gaze up at the WrestleMania sign. And I guess, for them it's a very symbolic thing because of what Ronda represented. It was a new phase for the women's division. All this attention now because of Ronda that was going to be shown. They just had their first women's Rumble. So it's a symbolic thing. Her debut does not belong to even sniff the top 10. I have no idea how this made the top 25, let alone the top 5. Ronda had one of the greatest debut matches at WrestleMania that year against Triple H and Stephanie. It was her and Kurt Angle against Triple H and Stephanie. But her actual debut does not belong on here. Certainly not this high up on the list. Number 3 is Goldberg, who debuted on Raw the night after WrestleMania 19, right? That would have been 2003. Rock was in the ring. He was already being showered by Goldberg chants, and he told the people, "Stop talking about my accountant, Ira Goldberg." He tried his best to try to deflect. But then they cut to the back, and we saw Goldberg. He was wearing his own leather jacket or whatever it was, bomber jacket, and he's coming out to the ring. They circle each other. He spears the Rock. Right, the last really big star from the WCW guys, or, WCW days, to come over to WWE, other than Sting. And it was a big moment. Goldberg's debut got a big reaction. He was a big name. Is he number 3? No. Not on my list. Is it top 10? Probably. I don't think I would have it at number 3, though. No, definitely not. Number 2, Kane. This is the only choice, in my opinion, for number 1. If you had Kane at number 2, okay, fine. As they do have Kane at number 2. But on my list, Kane is number 1. You're not going to find a better WWE debut than Kane. This is a story that was built up over a period of many months. And at that show, we had the very first Hell in a Cell match between Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker, which is an absolute classic gem of a match. It is still, in my opinion, the greatest Hell in a Cell match that company has ever produced. One of the greatest matches, really, in the history of that company. They had 2 of them that year. They had that one, and they had the Bret Hart-Steve Austin match from WrestleMania 13. So even though business was lean for most of that year, they ended up getting 2 of their best matches ever, and the most infamous match in company history at the Survivor Series that year. 97, let me tell you. Looking back on it now, 97 was a hell of a trip. Plus the Hart Foundation, US angle. What a fucking year. But Kane comes out, flames shooting up, wearing the original mask, the original Kane outfit, looking like a fucking demon, walking down to this ring. Undertaker's in the ring, shocked look on his face. He can't believe what he's seeing. Is that his brother? He comes down to the cage. He grabs the door. He rips the door off its hinges. Gets in the ring, stands face to face with, his older brother. Shoots pyro out of the ring post, 3 of them anyway. One of them didn't shoot off. And then he gives him a tombstone and he leaves. So he debuts in the main event of this pay-per-view, the very first ever Hell in a Cell match, to attack The Undertaker, to lay out The Undertaker. And actually leads into the finish, and Shawn Michaels then pins The Undertaker, which then sent him to Montreal to challenge for the championship, because the winner was going to go on to wrestle Bret Hart for the title. But just the presentation, the outfit, the pyro, the lighting, the music, the mood, even the commentary, Vince McMahon, "That's gotta be Kane," and ripping the door off its... all of it, the total package. You will not find a better debut in this company than Kane. And then you take into consideration, of course, the longevity that he had. I don't think there's a fucking person who could have predicted the kind of run that Kane would go on to have, because so many times they would feed Undertaker these big giant monsters and he would slay them, and that would be it. And frankly, some of them just weren't very good. But this guy came in, and he ends up sticking around for over 20 years. And not only that, but he turned out to be pretty damn good. So, again, I have Kane at number 1. They have Kane at number 2. That's fine. Number 1 on their list, the number 1 greatest debut in WWE history, is The Shield from Survivor Series in 2012. Worthy of the top 10, certainly. The top spot? No. And I say that as a Shield fan. You guys know I'm a big fan of The Shield. But as the number 1 debut in company history, not even close. Worthy of top 10 because they debuted in the main event of Survivor Series and they attacked John Cena and Ryback, right? They were attacking some big names. They made an impression on night 1. And they were main event stars from the moment they debuted in that company. They didn't have to work their way from the bottom and go out and win a bunch of mid-card titles, even though, Ambrose won the U.S. title. They debuted as top stars from day 1. But it is not the number 1 best debut in company history. I know why that's on there, because all 3 of them went on to become champions and to become main eventers and future Hall of Famers, and they're all doing big things, right? No one bigger than Roman right now. But that alone does not make this the number 1 best debut. Kane and Chris Jericho are the 2 best WWE debuts of all time. I would have Kane at number 1 and Chris Jericho right behind him at number 2. And I'll tell you what, I might even go Nexus at number 3. I think I might have, I'd have to think about it, but I think I might have Nexus at number 3. I could certainly make the argument for Nexus being number 3. Again, how the hell are you going to rank the Nexus behind Braun Strowman and Asuka? It's ridiculous. How is Taz not ranked anywhere in the top 25? Taz is another one. I would even entertain the idea of Taz as number 3. If not number 3, then definitely in my top 5. Yeah, I mean, he went on and didn't become a champion, didn't become a big star, as big as maybe he should have been. Very disappointing, frankly, to see the kind of run he ended up having, I think, compared to what people were hoping for and expecting. And certainly the reaction he got that night in Madison Square Garden at the Royal Rumble when they hit his music, the place exploded because it was New York. And he's a New Yorker, and they knew who he was. And he comes out, towel over the head, right, looking like a badass. He's suplexing Kurt Angle all over the place. He beats Kurt Angle. Kurt Angle had not been beaten up to that point. He hadn't been around very long. He had only debuted, I guess, 2 months before this, but he had been undefeated up to that point. He comes in, he wrecks this guy, he passes out, the place goes nuts. Taz leaves the ring, walks right to the back. Kurt has to get stretchered out. This was his debut in Madison Square Garden. How is he not ranked in the top 25? Why? Because he went on to fizzle out and not become a big name in WWE? So what? We're talking about top debuts. He belongs in the top 25. He belongs in the top 10. Where's Big Show on this list? Now that I say these 2 names, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, how many names on this, let me see here, how many names on this list are currently in AEW? Let's see. Well, we know Ambrose is there, right? So we have the Shield in the number 1 spot. We have got Sting. He's currently in AEW. I think that might be about it, right? Not too many AEW people here on this list. Maybe that has something to do with it. Maybe they didn't want to give too much. Oh, I guess Jericho too. But I don't know. Maybe they didn't want to go wild with all the AEW names. But like Big Show, he cut through the ring in the middle of the Austin McMahon cage match at St. Valentine's Day Massacre. And he threw Stone Cold Steve Austin through the side panel of the cage. Now, it ended up winning the match for Austin, which kind of made Big Show look like a dumbass, I guess. But that was still a pretty cool debut. That was a pretty important way to debut in the company, right? Trying to help the owner of the company beat your top star. Coming up through the ring. Eric Bischoff. Coming out to be announced as the Raw GM and hugging Vince McMahon, right? It looked like hell had frozen over. How's that not on this list? What about Paige? We have a couple of people on this list who won championships in their debut. Why not Paige? She debuted the night after WrestleMania, beat AJ Lee, won the Women's Championship. So there were definitely names that were conspicuously absent from this list. I'll throw one more at you. I'll throw Sami Zayn in there. Sami Zayn, it was not meant to be his official main roster debut even before he got hurt, but he made his Raw debut on the show in 2015. And think about this. He came out to accept John Cena's U.S. title open challenge, being introduced by Bret Hart in Montreal, in his hometown of Montreal, introduced by Bret Hart to wrestle John Cena. That's a pretty big fucking debut right there. Now, he got hurt when he was flailing his arms around. He was so excited. During his entrance, he tore his rotator cuff. He wrestled that match with a torn rotator cuff. He missed a lot of time after that. But that was a hell of a debut. I don't know how that's not on the list. So let me know what you guys think. I'm very curious where you think these debuts rank and some of my choices as compared to the ones they made. I'm sure everyone's list is going to look different. It's always fun to have a debate about this, but there's always just a few head scratchers that I look at and I go, what the fuck were they thinking? I know sometimes what they like to do, they want to have contemporary people on these lists. Because they, their audience, they know who Asuka is and they know who Braun Strowman. So I get that, right? I understand why they make some of the choices they do, but as far as the placement of some of these choices, I would love to know who they have there putting these lists together.